and a figure was mentioned about above 1 billion have been already pledged. But I think you also said that more was perhaps coming today and so on. So I would like to know what are the final figures pledged for support to Syria, and what is it compared to the previous 6 conferences you mentioned? And last but not least, I mean, how does the Commission plan to make sure that all that money will be, let's say, channeled and delivered to the ground, while the EU is not engaging with Syria or not recognizing the Assad regime, as the High Commissioner said himself? Thank you.
So, we're not in the High Commissioner context. We have the High Representative and Vice President of the Commission. High Commissioner evokes other memories. So, the High Representative had a press conference yesterday. What are the final figures?
Well, Mose, just to keep it very short for the sake of the colleagues, we issued a press release announcing the final pledge, and there is a dedicated website for the Brussels conference, 7654321, so you can find all the numbers from previous conferences there.
Okay, Georgi, you get the last question in the end.
Merci. Tu as eu la gentillesse de m'inviter pour un follow-up qui arrive avec un petit retard. On a discuté le commissaire qui remplacera Mme Gabriel, homme ou femme. Je ne t'ai pas demandé est-ce que c'est nécessaire que le remplaçant soit du même bord politique. Donc voilà, c'est ma question. Est-ce qu'il y a une obligation ou pas, que ce soit PPE, que ce soit là? Parce que Mme Gabriel était PPE. Est-ce que l'obligation existe?
Georgi, ce sont les États membres qui proposent le nom du commissaire. C'est une proposition souveraine de la part des États membres. Donc, je n'ai rigoureusement aucun commentaire à faire sur l'affiliation politique des personnes qui pourraient être nommées éventuellement candidats pour ce poste de commissaire par les autorités bulgares. Voilà qui conclut notre conférence de presse avec une précision toute suisse. Merci beaucoup, bon week-end et à la semaine prochaine.
police substance abuse under its new mandate. Especially worrying now is the rise of synthetic opioids, fentanyl. A few weeks ago in Antwerp, I met with Ann Milgram, the administrator of the DEA, the US Drugs Enforcement Agency. She told me that last year in the United States, 107,000 people died after taking synthetic drugs last year, 70% of those taking fentanyl. Fentanyl and other synthetic opioids are easy to make. They can be made on the spot, don't need to be smuggled across continents. Small quantities are enough for thousands of doses, can be easily transported. They are extremely potent, dangerous, and deadly. We must make sure America's present does not become Europe's future. Drugs don't only damage people's health, they also damage our society. Criminals use the profits from drug trafficking to buy people, buy police officers, and to buy murder. Violence is growing in scale and brutality. In the past, criminals shot people in the leg as a warning. Now they shoot them in the head. 50 explosions in Rotterdam last year so far, 50 in Amsterdam. In Stockholm last weekend, 7 people were shot. A 45-year-old man and a 15-year-old boy died. Shot dead with a military automatic weapon. It's time to realize organized crime is as big a threat towards our society as terrorism. The main points of entry for drugs into Europe are our ports. Nearly 100 million cargo containers entered our ports every year. Only a few can be inspected, between 2 and 10%. So it's easy for criminals to infiltrate our ports, Rotterdam, Antwerp, Hamburg, but also Barcelona, Gioia Tauro, Le Havre, all massive points of entry. Criminals set up front companies to send drugs along with legitimate cargo and target port workers, personnel of shipping, transport and security companies, law enforcement and customs officials. Criminals join sports clubs, take on jobs in ports just to get close to these people and offer a lot of money for information, for access, for container codes, for crane operators to put a container in a spot that's easy to reach, bribes of hundreds of thousands of euro, up to 15% of the value of a shipment. I visited Antwerp in February, together with Alexis and also together with the Belgian Minister of Interior, Annelies Verlinden. I was there again last month, and we launched a Schengen evaluation to investigate drugs trafficking in Europe's harbors. To defeat crime locally, we must fight crime internationally, through police cooperation and information exchange. That's why I traveled to Colombia and Ecuador, where I visited the port of Guayaquil. We agreed to improve security of ports on both sides of the Atlantic and increase our police cooperation. And I'm very happy to hear that now we are in a position that we hopefully can start negotiate working arrangement for the new drugs agency together with both Colombia and Ecuador already this year. In September, I will follow up with a high-level dialogue with Colombia. And we also need the US on board. Next week, I will discuss how we tackle drugs with Home Affairs Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and Attorney General Merrick Garland in the EU-US Justice and Home Affairs Ministerial meeting in Stockholm. The fentanyl threat is on the top of the US agenda. That's why Secretary Blinken has initiated a global coalition to address synthetic drug threats. I will be speaking at a ministerial kickoff event on the 7th of July. Our fight back is ongoing. We are deepening coordination at home, broadening cooperation abroad. I will be using your data, Alexis, your intel, this report, this excellent drugs report. This report and the agency's expanded role helps us, identify the trends, coordinate responses, and stop the violent, awful consequences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you very much for your very kind words. And I would like to thank you and the Commission, but also the Member States, the European Parliament, and all the partners of the agency, starting with the RATOX network of national focal points, because the report is the result of broad cooperation and networks to develop data collection and analysis, but also obviously for the decision that will be becoming published in the official journal very soon now about the transformation of the EMCDDA into a new agency. I will come back to this point at the end. I think we are talking, if you listen to the presentation of the Commissioner, and you gave a fantastic summary overview of the drug situation, what we see, we are talking about a fast-changing phenomenon in a fast-changing world. Just imagine 3.5 years ago, who would have imagined that all Europe could be blocked because of a virus, like the COVID, but also the possible consequences of having a war on the territory of Europe, with the war in Ukraine following the invasion by Russia. All of this has an impact already today and potentially in the future about the drug situation on the territory of the European Union. To characterize the situation, we have 3 keywords that are everywhere, everything, and everyone. First, everywhere, because drugs are everywhere today in Europe. There was never so many drugs and substances available in such a high purity or potency, and also at stable or low prices. At the same time, everything today is used or can be used as the object of addictive behavior. And of course, it has consequences. I will share some of those consequences with you in terms of potential harm and the need also to adapt the offer for prevention, treatment, and harm reduction intervention, for instance. And then the third key word, which is everyone, and you gave a few very concrete examples. It's today everyone can, either personally or in the family, in the relatives, people they know or live with, everybody can have an episode, temporary or chronic, of addictive behavior, but also, and this is very new compared with, for instance, 10 years ago, everyone can be confronted to the consequences of drug-related violence on the territory of the European Union. When the European Commission adopted a bit more than 10 years ago a strategy on drug-related violence, it was talking about Central America. Today we talk about Europe. So it's, as you said, it's time to act, to react, and to strengthen the cooperation. You mentioned rightly the evolution of the availability. I will not repeat those figures. I would add that indeed we have an increased availability of synthetic substances, synthetic drugs, but also heroin. The seizures of heroin on the territory of the EU have doubled in 21 compared with 2020, reaching 9.5 tons of heroin seized. But if we look at the partnership we have with countries like Turkey, in 2021, in Turkey, they seized 22 tons, which was also the double of the seizures compared with the previous year. Talking about cannabis, we have 816 tons of cannabis resin that have been seized in 21, and around 250 tons of herbal cannabis seized the same year, part of it being produced on the territory of the EU. And this brings me to the other dimension of everywhere. Is today Europe is also worldwide, a global level producer of drugs. Many drugs are being produced in Europe now, and some of them are not or not yet for local use, but are re-exported in other areas of the world. The Commissioner mentioned the 450 laboratories that have been dismantled. That's a huge increase compared with the previous data. I must say that it's not only reflecting the increase in the development of those laboratories, but it is a fantastic result of the Sky ECC operation and a few other ones that I think we have not finished to get the benefits, because the colleagues of our sister agency Europol and the director Catherine de Boll, we are in close contact and cooperation, and there is such a huge volume of data and information that we can expect still good results to come in the future. Talking about those new substances, we are also potentially facing new risks because the profile and the use are changing. For instance, ketamine, that is a substance that was and is not yet consumed in many places. Still, when we look at the results of the web survey in 2021, the web survey is a survey through internet among people who are using drugs, and we had 13% of those persons who declared they had been consuming ketamine. So that's one of the substances where, at local level, they are installing themselves in some niche market. We have other substances like methamphetamine in some countries or some cities. For instance, in Catalonia, we observe in the recent years that methamphetamine was used by the public practicing chemsex, but it seems that the data suggests the use of methamphetamine is going beyond this specific group of users, which means that the National Spanish Drug Coordination, for instance, is trying to address and anticipate what may be the consequences. Certainly, you know the series on the internet about methamphetamine, but we certainly don't want to have such an epidemic being developed in Europe. So we need to anticipate, which means we need to also adapt our responses. And talking about those responses, I think when we speak about everyone, the two questions are, how can we better protect? How can we better care? The Commission has made a reference to the coalition of member states against serious and organized crime and the ministerial conference that took place in Antwerp 1 or 2 weeks ago. I think there is a strengthened cooperation, and I'm happy to have also colleagues from the embassies of Ecuador and Colombia present today, because we have, following your initiative and your travel to Ecuador and Colombia, we got the official request from the two countries to ask for a working arrangement with the MCDDA, and we received them on time. So we hope that our management board will give me the mandate to negotiate the agreement, and we look forward being able to conclude it by the end of this year. And Chile has decided on its own initiative to follow the move and also to ask for such bilateral cooperation. But we need also to combine the efforts: law enforcement, public health, improved and more investment in prevention. And there we have a good knowledge base in Europe. We have good tools. We have a curriculum, for a European curriculum on prevention. We have a lot of knowledge about how to improve the access to treatment, but we need to reinvent the solutions and the responses, because they've been built for the heroin epidemic world. Today, the world is changing. The substances, as you understand from this joint presentation, are changing. The harms and the risks associated are changing. So we need to learn the lessons, to invent and reinvent new responses. And my last point would be talking about the global threats. Global meaning global phenomenon, global problems with an impact at local level. And here there are two examples. I mentioned Ukraine, where we are, of course, closely following, supporting, monitoring the situation in Ukraine together with our partners. But we know that the situation in Ukraine has not only an impact for the Ukrainians, it has an impact for the EU countries or neighboring countries that are welcoming refugees from Ukraine. There is a potential huge impact on the mental health of the refugees, but also the hosting populations. And this may lead to some use or abuse of substances just to cope with an unbearable situation. So the challenge more broadly of mental health and the possible consequences in terms of addictive behavior, being acute or becoming chronic, is something to be taken into consideration. Also because the impact is also on the side of the trafficking routes and possible changes that can affect the EU. And finally, the last point, and the Commissioner made a reference to the initiative of the United States, but if we look at local threats, we cannot not mention Afghanistan. There was a declaration from the Taliban regime that they would put a ban on the production of opium. Recent satellite imaging was published last week, suggesting that indeed in the province of Helmand, at least, there is a very strong eradication of images that the crops have been eradicated in that region. What we don't know is it going to be maintained or is it just occasional? If it is the case, is there going to have an impact on the heroin market in Europe? Is there a risk for people using heroin to move to the use of synthetic opioids? We need to be ready. Preparedness is the key, one of the key words of the new mandate of the agency. And I need to mention also that Afghanistan, the recent years, has developed and built a strong capacity to produce methamphetamine. And we don't know yet if the plan from the Taliban regime is to eradicate the production of any drugs on their territory, or if it is targeting only opium and maybe a support or a promotion to the production and trafficking of methamphetamine. So with the new mandate that you proposed for the agency, and again, it's a pleasure, not only a duty, to support the Commission and our Commissioner and the Member States. I think in 4 words, what is going to change with the new agency is that our new strategic objective is the EU preparedness as far as drugs are concerned, which means 4 words for which we already do things, but we will be able to do more, better, and provide more support to the Member States. Capacity of better anticipate what could happen in the future. The second is supporting a better alert system. The third one is supporting the responses, the assessment of needed responses, of available needs, and of maybe necessary complementary responses or tools. And the fourth, which is assess and learn, because in the very digital and very already transformed world in which we are living, to assess the responses and the interventions and the policies and strategies, and providing decision makers with the scientific evidence for adjusting the strategies to the new needs and taking into account the results, will be more than ever our common endeavor. And we are very proud to stand and to be there at your service with the new mandate and the new agency. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're moving now towards the question on the drug report. I'm checking the platform. Yes. Please introduce yourself and the media you work in.
In the Bulgarian from El Universal newspaper, Mexico. Commissioner, we see that increasing participation of drug cartels in trafficking of cocaine and production of methamphetamine of drug cartels in Europe. And we see also that the Mexican cartels are responsible of the crisis of fentanyl in the United States. Are you thinking to establish a new cooperation with Mexico, or how do you describe the actual cooperation with Mexico, considering that you are taking the lead with links with Colombia and Ecuador? And Alexis Gonzalez, I would like to know, what are the implications in drug trafficking of the war in Ukraine? Thank you.
Yes, so it's clear. When I went to Latin America a few months ago, I was the first ever Commissioner for Home Affairs who went to the continent, or to the area actually. And the reason is, of course, that the criminal groups are cross-border, and not only cross-border, they're cross-Atlantic. So that's why we need to establish much, much closer cooperation when it comes to police cooperation. So they possibly will now negotiating a lot of new mandates for Europol with a lot of Latin American countries. We are also involving, I was also in Ameripol, which is also an important partner. There will be, during the Spanish presidency, will invite the ministers of interior of the Latin American countries for a discussion on this topic, during their presidency. So we are involving in different ways. We are also looking into exchange information port to port. So this is really an area where we need to do much more to be able to fight together. So it's clear that I think no country can fight these organized criminal groups alone. So that's why we really need a much stronger international cooperation, not at least crossing the Atlantic.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. First of all, I can also add that Mexico is involved in the cooperation with the EU through the COPOLAT regional or bi-regional program, and this cooperation is ongoing for more than 10 years now. So there are contacts, there are projects, there are joint activities, and support. There was a meeting 1 month ago in Lisbon to support the strengthening and development of national drug observatories. So there is a concrete cooperation. We could have one day also a bilateral cooperation or more bilateral. Regarding the impact of the war in Ukraine on drug trafficking or the trafficking route, well, essentially, I would say 2 key impacts. First, since the invasion of Crimea, and the troubles that were in Donbass and the other region, some analysts have described that even if there was a state of low-level war, still those borders were it was quite permeate. So trafficking arrangement between different armed groups was still possible for a criminal organized group. Now, with the war as it is, this route is closed, which means also that the route or the trafficking route that was passing through Ukraine or even through some of other countries bordering the Black Sea, it's not possible because you have major threats to the circulation of any ships, and including for the shipments. So there is an impact, for instance, on the trafficking routes that go south of the Black Sea through Turkey, and it's unavoidable that there will be and there is an impact on the borders between Turkey, Bulgaria, Turkey and Greece, and then also, of course, through the Mediterranean. So there are changes in the routes. There are some indications of changes, recent changes in the seizures, and I'm sure that we are going to be able to see and to say more about this in the coming years. And then a phenomenon that can be interacting with that is the development of a broad network of container ports which are now managed by non-EU countries, where there may be some challenges for ensuring a permanent control of the shipments of the containers, and certainly this calls for a renewed attention and control also on this topic.
Thank you. Looking for other questions, I see you. Moving on to Mira on the platform.
So, hi, thank you for the question. I'm wondering if the new agency will have a mandate to propose policies, international policies on drugs.
Mira, the connection was quite bad. I'm not sure if you got the gist of it. More or less, you want to give it a try? Okay.
Well, thank you for the question, Mira. As far as I understood the question, it's true the audio was not optimum. I think the agency will have in its mandate renewed responsibilities and more capacities as far as international cooperation is concerned. But it's essentially in support of the EU institutions and the EU member states. So the agency itself is not going to drive initiatives as far as international drug policy is concerned, but we have a very close partnership with the major other international organizations like UNODC, WHO, CICAT, OAS, but also with the DEA. And for instance, in the future, one of the new capacities and activities of the agency will be to develop a European drug profiling capacity that, of course, will need to operate and exchange information, for instance, with the DEA.
Thank you. We take the last question. David.
Thank you. David Carretta, Radio Radicale, Italian Radio. First of all, a question on the report to both of you. 5 EU member states are adopting or have already a different approach on cannabis, plus Switzerland, by the way. I can see that you want to monitor it, but there are already some data and so on from what some US states are doing in this field. I'm wondering if you have already a comment on this new approach in Europe. Should it be followed by other member states? And second question on a different topics to Commissioner Johansson, if I may, on what happened in Greece Sea. Commissioner, you said several times that it's all smuggler, traffickers' fault. And I think that we can agree with that. But I would like to ask you two things. First of all, do you see the need to more search and rescue capabilities, public capabilities, in the central Mediterranean? The number of deaths is already more or less the same of last year. Second question. In March, the UN Human Rights Council published the fact-finding independent mission report saying that basically all the Libyan authorities you are working with are colluded or are working, or our militia are working with smugglers and traffickers, or are themselves smugglers, public authority of Libya. And the same report said that the EU and its member states directly or indirectly support those authorities. So I'm wondering if you think that we should stop to cooperate with those smugglers. Thank you.
Thank you. I will first answer to the first question before to hand over to Commissioner Johansson. Indeed, there are 4 member states that have a project for legalizing recreational use of cannabis. And we, as the European Drugs Agency, we are first following the development because there are still a lot of discussions ongoing. We are also providing a technical support to help all countries, not only those 4 countries, to understand and imagine what are the indicators that could be necessary to define in order to take a decision, but then to define the objectives and then to monitor the implementation, to assess. And as far as you mentioned, so it's we are working with the countries and we are informing, of course, everybody. I need to say that for the moment, one of the biggest challenges is the reliability of data. You spoke about some of the states in the US. Well, the responsible from the same states say themselves that their data are a bit dodgy, if you allow me the expression, that they are not entirely reliable, and that therefore some of the benchmarks are not fully trustable. So that's one thing. And also one thing we have observed in the comments made by some states, which I think are not really reliable, is associating the decrease in the trend of reduction of the cannabis consumption in the States, in the US, to associate it or to link it as a causality with the legalization of cannabis recreational use. This is not correct. There is a trend in school surveys in the US for years towards a decrease in the use of cannabis among the young population. So the fact that you have 2 phenomena that are concomitant doesn't allow you to establish a strong link of causality if there is no scientific evidence. So certainly, one of the debates and the discussions between the member states, it's about clarification of what are the objectives or what would be the objectives of those new policy initiatives to assess what is the feasibility and how can they measure the effects, taking into account that whatever the decision, you need to mitigate some risks associated. One of those risks, as it is visible in some of the states in the US, it's driving under the influence of drugs, or the risk created by new edibles or new e-vaping products. And I think what we look forward with a lot of interest also is the results of the evaluation in Canada. Canada has a very strong and well-established tradition capacity of scientific evaluation of public policies. So with a model that is very different from many of the other existing in the Americas, we are really interested to know what we can learn from it. We received the visit of the Minister of Health of Canada 3 weeks ago in the agency. I've been invited for an official visit to Canada after the summer, and as soon as results for evaluation will be available, of course, we will analyze, we will share, we will communicate, and we will continue to follow those developments, whatever the direction, because we are supposed to give the scientific evidence for any of those scenarios.
The second question, of course, we don't have all information yet on what has happened, but it seems like this is the worst ever tragedy we've seen in the Mediterranean. It seems like a fishing boat loaded with probably 750 people has left from the eastern part of Libya, heading towards Italy. And so far, only 100 have been rescued, or more or less, out of these. So this seems to be one of the ever worst tragedies we've seen. Those smugglers that put these people on these boats, they are not sending them to Europe. They are sending them to death. This is what they are doing. And it's absolutely necessary to prevent it. Unfortunately, we have seen this coming because since the start of this year, there was a new modus operandi with these fishing boats leaving from the eastern part of Libya. We've seen an increase of 600% of these departures this year. And it seemed to be a new modus operandi. With the first information we have that the smugglers that have been arrested so far, if I'm rightly informed, are Egyptian nationalities. So, of course, there are different things we need to do. Search and rescue is important. I don't exclude the capacity, but I think coordination is even more important. Today, there is a meeting in the search and rescue contact group, and we, the commissioners, put on the agenda also this tragedy that just occurred. And I think the meeting is ongoing right now. When it comes to fighting the smugglers, we can't rely on only one way to do that. We have to use intelligence. We have to use common police investigations together with countries of origin, with countries of transit, with countries of departure. But also to say that I think that we could not say that we could completely leave out any contact with the Coast Guard in Libya, even though this report I mentioned, of course, is of very high concern. But we need to address different ways to fight these smugglers and to save lives. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further questions, so this concludes our press point. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.